It is 6:31 p.m. Good evening. I'd like to open and call to order the December 30th, 2024 School Committee Special Meeting held both in person at the School Committee Conference Room of the Stoughton Public Schools District Office, 31 Pierce Street in Stoughton, and virtually pursuant to the Attorney General's updated guidance on holding virtual meetings pursuant to the Act extending certain COVID measures pursuant to the Act extending certain COVID measures of March 29th, 2023, as extended through March 31st, 2025. We have a quorum present, so let's begin. Before we get into the rest of that, I would like to note that Assistant Superintendent Jonathan Ford is online. Everybody else, all the school committee members, and Dr. Baida and Heidi Perkins are in the room with us. This meeting is being recorded by SMAC for future broadcasting. Please rise if you're able for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Chris. All right.
Just a little unsteady, that's all.
All right. The first item on the agenda is public comment on the FY 2026 budget. I don't know that I see anybody online, and there is no one present in the room. Yes. Maureen, do you have a question or a comment before we get started?
Maureen, you're on mute. Sorry, what?
Do you have a question? You have the hand raised on there, and I just wanted.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. We're just making.
I apologize.
No, we just were making sure that you could hear us, and you had a chance to ask questions if you need to. All right. See none. Wait like half a second. Don't want to, in case anyone's still trying to log in. All right, well, as no one has signed up for public comment, let's move on to the FY 2026 budget. We did vote the articles last time, so those have been submitted to Town Hall and received. So now it's on to the budget proper. Budget Working Group, would you like to, anything that you'd like to add? I think we had a presentation last week, but if there's anything you'd like to add since then.
The working group hasn't met. I don't think we have anything to add. I wonder, Dr. Baida, maybe it's if you want to voice over some of the questions that folks sent in, and just any high-level things that came out of that reflection process.
Yeah. So thank you, and thank you for all of the questions. And I want to publicly thank Heidi, who worked with me on with our limited staffing because of the holiday, as you know, but we were able to get things organized and done for you tonight. So we can, I have a prepared email to go to FinCom, Select Board, and all of that as of tonight. Just have to hit it after you vote this. And then I'll talk a little bit about the other additional things as we work towards House 1 coming out. 7.59%, reflective of the starting point, 5.5. We started to really have to take a look at elimination. Most of that was offsets coming from the year of adding positions back this year. If you remember, the kindergarten paraprofessionals, nurse, et cetera, late bus, those are the priorities that were established to bring back. We had some savings in a situation with the kindergarten situation we had to add because we registered 40 kindergarten students this year. And we had a grade 3 situation with 26 kids in the classroom that we resolved as well. But much of that, except for the K teaching position in the grade 3, much of that is already part of going from 7.59 to 5.5. So we are going to be seeing FTEs cut from within this budget in that process. Second part of the process is to meet the 3.8 local initiative with the understanding that there'll be further discussions on this budget. So in order for us to get there, we are going to be looking at a total combination of some further non-staff cuts that I'm going to have to get creative with, and potentially somewhere in the area of 15 positions. I'm hoping to make it less by the time I get into the weeds. That will include classroom and support staff positions, including positions at central office, and potential savings in any areas where we have not hired positions, i.e., I'm thinking anything from custodians, administrative assistants, those types of things. We're just going to freeze those. And we're going to have to take a look at some programming cuts as well, without hurting the needs of students, especially those required by federal statute and state statute. So our FTE loss right now is approximately 29. That's total, okay? And then from that 29, it's actually 26 because we have to add a special ed position and 2 paras for the new TLC program at the Wilkins Elementary School because we have 11 students going from early childhood from our preschool program, which is a number that is just, large. The next phase of this, after you vote tonight, will be a couple of things that I'm going to put in play that I think it will be helpful. First of all, we are going to work diligently starting Thursday on the budget, the line items, and all of that stuff, and be prepared so that when House 1 comes out, literally send, done. And you guys, will, of course, will be involved with that because of potential changes. And we don't know what those are yet, but you are responsible for that as a school committee. The other major thing that will happen next is we'll start working on our budget booklet, if you will, handbook, if you will, as we did last year, which has got everything from a nice cover page to my summary of the budget, which is usually about 1 to 1.5 pages. And that is something that I typically write with the chair and the vice chair. That's what we did last year, so we'll work on that. We already have a starting point of that document. And then a table of contents that will do the budget cover page. Then I'll get down into the budget breakdowns. What are the cuts? Where are they? From there, we'll get into enrollment. From there, we'll go into our triennial plan priorities, which is entering its last year. Our budget reductions will then go next. Then the line item budget, which is 20 plus or so pages. We'll go into enrollment trends, and I'm separating the two so that people can see the trends versus the actual. I'll have all of this in writing for you. We'll have the breakdown on specialized populations. In some of those areas, as you know, when we have less than 10 students, I actually don't put the number in. I just note less than 10 because I don't want children to be, folks in the public to be able to pinpoint. We'll also have some type of a page that is in the budget. It's on the last page called offsets, but I want to get a little deeper into the offsets. We will have a page on fees because I think it's important. It is an offset, but those are decisions you're going to have to make in the future. Could be closer to town meeting, by the way. I think you have that. But we'll need to know on one of them sooner than later because we want to move the transportation process up. We'll have the capital requests in there. We'll have the comparisons to other districts like we've done in the past. Then we'll do the one area that you're used to, which are used to as of last year, which is the DESE actual Chapter 70 charts. And then the last one will be a new section that I will be responsible for in working with you folks, which is what I would call FY27 and beyond. And that would be looking at increased enrollment, staffing issues, staffing shortages, space issues. Those are bigger items. So that's a section where we could be saying, okay, well, if we had to open up another preschool by regulation, where does that go? If you need another kindergarten classroom, where does that go? So we'll put those into priorities for the committee to have. The other two parts that we're going to add a little differently, by state regulation, we have to notify, unless it's in the contract, all employees by June 14th. So that's the state statute, unless there's a local agreement that has an earlier date. So earlier date in the contract, which I don't believe we have, I'll verify that, and if not, June 14th. Now, the problem with notifying folks June 14th is their ability to find income, find a new job, and so on. So we're in this pickle of too early, too late. So I'm going to suggest to you that we take a look at sometime in late March, early April, the beginning of notification to staff. If we're feeling that this is where the budget is going, we can always rescind that letter. And we'll do it in probably some pockets. By then, we should also probably start to see either some new retirements or some resignations. Most of our resignations, actually, believe it or not, are late May, June, July, sometimes early August. Lately, it's been really June and July. Or potential further notifications of students, of staff not returning. In other words, they've been out on a leave, they've met the deadline that they're coming back, but they've changed their mind, they're no longer coming back. Then that becomes a question of, do we need the position or not? So if we need the position, you have to budget for it. It is budgeted. If not, maybe you're budgeting at a less amount because the person's going out at M10 and you're hiring at M5. And you see, take a look at some of those savings. What I also try to do is, and this will be my last comment, is in the some of the questions that came from the committee, one of the things that I wanted to reflect on was how I must, through you or with you, I must do exactly what you just did. I've got to present this budget on probably a couple of different shows. I don't know if people will watch them, but we need to be outside of the school committee meeting, where we're going to say, high school, what does it mean? Gibbon School, what it means, and so on, and spend that hour show going detail by detail, because it's such a different approach that we're trying to do, and we're trying to make sure that people have some of the same questions that you already have. We'll continue to clean up the Q&A questions. I think those should be posted. It's up to you. If you want to post them, they're a public record, so it doesn't really matter. But we could put it in. We could put it in the packet so that people can see the questions that have already been asked. We could put it online under a new section called FY26 budget. And once we post the budget, we have a Q&A section, and people can go through that section. That's really up to you folks. If you think that's if that's an area that we should be working on. 3 concerns. 1, the turnover on the shelter student situation is happening quickly. That is a great thing because they're finding homes to go to and not a shelter, out of town or in town. If they're out of town, we have a McKinney-Vento problem. McKinney-Vento is the cost that if the students want to stay in Stoughton, but they now live in Quincy, they have the right for the remainder of the school year to be in Stoughton. And we split the cost with the city of Quincy, as an example. Those costs are significant.
Is the state planning to, have we heard anything from the state about supporting with those costs since it's tied to their
we have
initiative?
not seen any increase in McKinney-Vento discussions. So that's a concern, because what that could do is that could eat up any type of sway money that we end up with from the shelter stuff going. I do think we do have to have some discussions about how McKinney-Vento works in our school-town budget process, in terms of, if funds are going into the general fund for McKinney-Vento, those funds should be part of coming back to the school budget, because literally we run negatives in order to run those. We try to start a positive, but it always goes into 6 figures. So just something you should put on your plate is something we want to have maybe some further discussions about. Second, this one is more of an internal issue, but where we are having a real issue with Medicaid reimbursement and folks fulfilling the requirement of completing the work survey for students that they provide services to. The last 3 months, we're not getting our staff to do those reports and count towards money. That does go back to the general fund and not directly to us, but still, if that figure could be $500,000 or $600,000, that just means it's a better number for all involved, and make an argument that maybe someday make an argument that it should go into special education, specialization accounts, or all of that stuff. The third one is probably one that we're not seeing yet. There's a significant crisis in finding educators. It is now moved from the we can't find them to a crisis. So we're trying to get the state to have some further flexibility like they did during COVID. We're just not getting that support. So I think that we will have that discussion. Well, now, why do I say that as part of FY26 budget discussions? Because finding a special education teacher, an EL teacher, a math teacher is becoming more of a problem. But if you're laying them off, it's even a bigger issue, because now you have the issue of why work in Stoughton. Now, I'm not suggesting those are the positions we're cutting. I'm just telling you that this is the ring-around factor of employment. Because according to my discussions with Jonathan, we have well over a decade of not filling positions through attrition, but not laying off folks, which leads to the last point, which is if in fact these layoffs go through, we're going to need to discuss a supplemental budget in the fall for unemployment. We'll have money in there now, but that number could go higher than we have set aside. So that's the overall picture. I'll take any questions. If I can address them, I will. If I can't, I'll write them down and make sure that I work on it and get you an answer back.
Sure. Any questions? Armando?
Yeah. Thanks. If you can, I know this is on the fly and might be hard to do, but if you can tell us a little bit what the impact would be if we went up and increased from 3.8 to 4.8 to 5.8, and just get an idea how big or how less severe the crisis would become.
Great question. So one of the things that Heidi and I will work with you on is what does it look like, probably in the vicinity of 1% increases, but which is about 500 to 600,000. I'm going to guess somewhere in that ballpark, a little less. I don't have that number, but we will take it and we'll start with the priorities that came last that were cut and make them one to come back. I've always said that if you get to the point of cutting a teacher, that's the first person you bring back, because that has a direct impact in classrooms or support services or whatever it may be. And so we will prioritize from in that process. So in the past, I've done budget requests like you just said. Hey, if it was 1% more, what would you prioritize coming back? And then the committee, of course, has a say in that, and stage 2, stage 3. So right now, we're about $1,068,000 is the difference between 3.8 and 5.5. So, we could chunk those in chunks so that people could actually see what you're getting back if you're able to do that. You're at the point now of people. You're at the point of people, wherever that impact is going to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Okay. I don't know if you've had a discussion with the town manager or the select board chair. I was wondering if it's possible to engage with them in the possibilities where, when we finally go through the numbers, when the time comes, and it looks like we're bleeding more than we expect, would they support us in perhaps bringing some money into the schools to the point where we have to stop the bleeding? Because if this goes on for many years or for years to come, I just don't see I don't see us having a very good educational program to continue to go forward.
Yeah, so first let's be mindful that the school district has already laid off staff. FY25, the year we're in, we laid off staff. And that was due through federal funding that was no longer available. This budget is all local budget line items. So there is no, you got a grant for 3 years, they're leaving. That's gone. So this will be the second year of layoffs in Stoughton. And these are even more significant. To that end, in my meetings with the town manager, and I'll defer to him, it has been a very direct, we want to make sure that the school systems are in a good place. So I do believe that the chair of the select board and my last discussions with him and the town manager are going to try to find support for us to not have to do some of these numbers. These are numbers that have not been seen in Stoughton in decades. Let's just say what it is when it comes to a local budget. So I believe there is a commitment to support the public education budget. I believe some of you have heard that commitment, but we are also, or at least I'm not committed, and I believe the committee, we're not committed towards any discussions on Prop 2.5 overrides or any commitments to cutting public safety for schools. That's not where we are either. We would have to get other creative means to be able to do that. And I don't think we're there yet, especially since the numbers literally come out like January 22nd, 23rd. We'll just have more factual information.
One more question, please. One of our concerns is that the population in Stoughton is increasing, which means student population, along with the many approvals of development in Stoughton, which is often good for business and for the residents. But when you bring in businesses, you also bring in families that want to live close to where they can be employed. And with development of potential apartment buildings, I don't know if the statistics are the same anymore, but for every family, a growing family, you can count about 2.5 child per family, if that's still true. So if we get 12 families to move in, that's a classroom of kids. I was wondering if, sorry Heidi, I was wondering if it's possible to go to a calculation and determining how much it costs us per additional classrooms as we proceed forward, because from what I understand, Stoughton is doing very well business-wise, which of course is going to attract families, and families will have include children. If it's possible to just try to estimate how much each additional classroom will cost. I know if 12 family moves in, we add a kindergarten class sooner or later, most likely if it's a young family. Or if it's older family, you might have to add it in middle school. But if we start at the bottom and determine how much that first class will cost us, say, an additional kindergarten class at Gibbons, which means that kindergarten class, and then that has to move forward into middle school and high school. But also, if we can break it out, and if we had a class per elementary school, and how that propagates as these elementary school, then we're going to the middle school, which is overcrowded, and into the high school. It would be great to have, because I think if you can communicate something similar to that to the select board and the town manager, I think they could really see and perhaps make a better evaluation on the pace of businesses and families moving in with apartment buildings as to the impact of the school, because obviously it's going to cost the school more to run with more children.
So two parts. First one, the Stoughton Public Schools has had a commitment in K-5, but really in K-2 to really target lower class sizes. So some of that's already gone away as part of the cuts that we just made for this year, right? We're seeing more of our K classes and one classrooms at 21 and 22 than the more traditional 18, as an example. In terms of our cost, one teacher just on salary in K-5, maybe even K-8, depending on the areas of math and science, you're in the area of $65,000 that you're budgeting for. Maybe actually now a little higher than that, but roughly in that ballpark. Mm-hmm. The problem is that unless there's a lot of layoffs in other school districts, like we did have some this past summer, we just don't have those $52,000 kids coming out of college. We have to take from another school district where somebody's maybe already a Master 10 or a Master 15. Even kindergarten teachers, we're not finding at the level of the younger generation that's going into the field. K-5 in particular. Pre-K has always been a little different because traditionally in preschool you're looking for at least certified in special ed, if not dual certified. But in K-5, that's usually your, quote, lowest starting salaries because there was always a lot more folks applying for it. I remember the days of having 300 applicants for a first grade job. Those days are over. So for us, I think what we need to look at is, and this is part of that 27 and beyond idea, which is we currently truly don't have some needs that we haven't budgeted for and really haven't had a discussion about, which is areas like health and having a health requirement in middle school for all students. It's embedded in our PE program, but I'm talking about a classroom space and students really getting into good decision-making and all the things that we know about in that age group. Same thing at the high school. We don't have a traditional health class. And I think it's a very important area for our students. In terms of STEM, what does that look like? If we don't have a positive vote of a new building, whatever STEM we're going to have space in a new building, we need to think about STEM in all of our elementary schools, so that even though it's an older building, we can still create and get the items that are needed for that classroom, so that students are doing STEM-like things like robotics and hands-on approaches and project-based, and not just your traditional technology. So those are all the things that going forward we need to budget for. Now, there are some really difficult discussions. And I'm only saying this for the purposes of discussion, but there's only a certain amount of time in the school day. And so the discussions on digital literacy, technology, the arts, always comes to a head. I don't know a school system that's doing it all. It's choices. And it's choices that happen at your level of what does it look like. There's a current school system in their FY25 proposal for this year who made those significant changes. They moved towards something more around digital literacy and citizenship, which caused an issue with the arts at the elementary level, specifically bands, music, chorus, art teachers. They made that decision. I'm not suggesting that at all, so let's not put it out there. I'm just saying those are decisions for FY27 and beyond that you're going to have to make, because the school day is not going to get longer, the school year is not going to get longer. It's just more things that we need to do during the same amount of time. And the other part is, you know, I have some concerns about some of our academic outcomes at K to 5. And you know, we can look at third grade MCAS scores, fourth grade MCAS scores, fifth grade, and we have some areas where we're doing really well in some schools and some other schools that aren't doing as well, and why. Same thing at the middle school. So all of those are budgetary issues and or budgetary priorities. In other words, you're eliminating something to do something else instead of both. And both is because of the money, sometimes both is because of space and the schedule of the day. I don't know if that addresses the question, but in general, increased enrollments for us are going to start with some combination of a salary. And for us right now, it's the actual second part, which is not looking at closing the South and creating modulars. It's just looking at where do I put bodies at the DOS school without looking at modular classrooms. Not because of a building, because of enrollment. We will be having serious discussions about what space is the Wilkins closing down to create the TLC program. We already have 2 elementary schools with libraries aren't libraries anymore, they're classrooms. So.
One last question, I promise. This is for Catherine and Dr. Bayetta. Given his answers, which I think were great, I think we should possibly look at the possibility of moving our meeting date because it conflicts with the select board, and I really think we should perhaps think about having one of us attend all the select board meetings so we can get a direct connection to them. When they're potentially building apartments, we want to be able to say, oh, how many families, how many apartments, how many families do you expect, and everything else, so we can have better planning budget-wise in school.
I think ideally we're staggered so that we're supposed to be second and fourth Tuesdays and they're supposed to be first and third, but it doesn't always happen that way because of business. But certainly the tricky part is that if we are both meeting the same Tuesday, our agendas are posted at the exact same time. So it's finding that, but it's certainly, as we set the calendar for next year, we can certainly look at trying to stick to the second and fourth and asking if they could stick to the first and third or something of the sort.
Yeah, and everybody, and I don't think that's a bad idea, always having someone there, and I've worked in districts that has actually been a rotation through school committee members, which can be done from home even, right, because of the hybrid model in today's world. Don't forget that we all become at the beck and call of a number of other committees right around March 1st. And so all of our meetings we just have more meetings to attend, and they do as well. So we have a lot of FinCom on Mondays and Wednesdays, so that becomes another night. You can always add change meetings by having a tentative posting. It's just your schedules are going to get a little out of control.
Thank you.
Lindsay, do you have any questions or did you?
Yeah, okay. So a couple things I just want to underline and make sure that we're really clear on, because I think we've said these in previous meetings, but knowing that not everybody is going to watch every single meeting and who can blame them, want to make sure I reiterate a couple of things. So this budget the proposed budget is a 3.8% increase over last year. However, that does include these cuts that we've been talking about. The budget itself is not being reduced. It is being increased by 3.8%, but there are reductions in positions and expense lines because of pressures from mandated positions, transportation. We have contracts we are negotiating right now that you see in the administrative line as a set aside, contractual increases that are not being negotiated this year, out of district placement, increased enrollment. Am I missing any? What am I? So I just want to make sure that is really clear. There are some pressures here, which is why we are increasing the budget and also needing to make some reductions. So I want to make sure that is clear. The other piece I want to make sure is really clear is that this line item budget adds up to 5.5%, not 3.8. So what that means is there is a $1.07 million difference. And what that means is, when Dr. Baida, what you were saying is when House 1 budget comes forth in late January, then we will have a sense of what our additional Chapter 70 funds could look like and see how much, if not all, if not more than, how much of that delta we can restore. So I think what we need to do in the meantime, which you mentioned, is just having the list of, if we do need to get down to 3.8, what is that going to look like? I think we do need to have that list in those chunks that you mentioned of what does it look like if we get 100,000? What about 200? What can we start to add back? And I think if we could have that list for when the House 1 numbers are available so we can act very quickly, that would be super helpful. And I know you've been doing some of that, but it's too early, just given the information we have. And I think your recommendations there would be really helpful. And then that's also where we can look at fees and what makes sense for transportation fees when we have more information there. I just want to make sure we're saying that too, that is on the table. Restoring fees for transportation just because of pressures, again, on costs there, demand. We had the issue this year. So, sorry, I'm trying to read my notes now. Oh, and then the other piece I just want to make sure is really clear for the community is just that the Student Opportunity Act is the law that increases Chapter 70 from year to year over this 6-7 year period. That calculation is based on the needs of our students and our high need student population. So when those funds come in, it's because we have more students who have increased needs and therefore need some additional services from the school.
Can I add something onto that?
Yeah.
'Cause in conjunction with the aid comes an increase in our foundation budget, which is that minimum spending requirement that the state sets for us, and the minimum requirements for the municipality's share of the school cost. And again, that's set at the state level. The school committee has no input on that. And I was running some of the numbers that we have had over the past few years, and between FY22 and FY25, I believe we had $11 million increase in the Chapter 70 funding that we got because of the SOA, the Student Opportunity Act. but then we also had a $15.5 million increase in the foundation budget. I think that's really important for people to understand, is that we didn't get $1 million extra dollars. We got $1 million towards offsetting a $15.5 million increase in the requirements. And those requirements are those mandates for special education, for English language learners, for our lower income students, for our historically disadvantaged populations, even some of the, some of the other issues for the fact that we're not one of the wealthier communities that spends 150% of the net school spending, or even 200% in some cases. It's supposed to help balance out the spending across the state. So I think it's really important that it's not just money that's been given to us, a blank check. It's really to offset the fact that we have significant increases in costs.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. One last thing I want to add to that is just that when the calculation is done is October 1st of the previous school year, which means our aid this year is based on who was enrolled last October, which means anybody who moved in after October last year, so the remaining 9 months of the school year, as well as so far this year, are not accounted for in those numbers. So that's one of the challenges of Chapter 70 that I just feel like we need to make sure folks know about too, is we're almost two school, is it fair to say we're almost 2 school years behind? Like at least 1 school year. So
I just wanted to add, I'm going to ask Heidi to release something she sent to me on SOA and inflation. It's a, I think I have it. I think if I have it, I'll send it to you. It basically what it does is it takes a look at SOA and its intent, and then the curveball that we got with the COVID inflation, and how the dollar, it's just like buying eggs, right? We knew eggs were $1.09, and all of a sudden they're $6. That's exactly what happened with SOA. So there was a real intent that if that inflation had stayed at what it was, typically over time, the SOA funds that we would have today would actually be worth in the millions more. That's how bad it is. So I'll, between the two of us, I'll send it to you. It's electronic, and then you can look up Stoughton, and you can take a look across. It's very interesting.
that's super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I say all that to say there's a lot that we still don't know yet. So what we can do is, this 3.8% increase is based on the funding we do know about, based on the town's projections for revenue and everything for next year. And then there are still some question marks about revenue that we don't know about for sure yet. So we can move forward with this based on what we know about, and then when we get new information, adjust the plan accordingly. And I think that's what I want folks to understand. Does that feel fair? Okay. Okay. And then my last thing, sorry. My notes are a mess. Sorry. No, my last thing was just, I think this, the budget book and summary sounds like a really helpful tool, I think, to help people really get into the budget, the details, what goes into it, why things are the way they are in terms of enrollment. So I'm excited to take a look at that, and happy to help clean up some of the Q&A too, in terms of, like, if we want to make an FAQ doc or something, happy to help with that.
I think we probably just have a little bit of movement on that doc and just put a header on it. We're probably good to go. Because it's in a shared Google Doc, and that way if we have changes or updates, we can still go back to it.
Okay.
Rather than, if that's okay, rather than having a separate doc.
Sure. I'm happy to clean up a couple of the questions. I know I kind of did some shorthand, but happy to clean it up so it's actually readable.
Sorry. So we'll, maybe give it a couple of days
Okay.
for you to look at if the questions need to be changed, and then we'll see if there's anything else to answer.
Sure. Before I add anything, Chris, do you have anything? Okay, Chris.
A couple of things. First of all, just to double down on some of the things that were previously said. So the SOA funds, it's really about parity is all it is. It is something that is a gradual increase over time in recognition that the population that we are serving now is not the same population we were serving 10 years ago. And so in recognition of that, the state is providing additional aid to bring us up to the level where we should be so that we can provide the same level of services to all of the students who are in our district, a higher proportion of whom are now high needs. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that folks understand that it's not, it's about the fact that we've been running, in a sense, at a deficit, and the state is trying to bring us up to parity. So that is all that is, and that's why it's only for 7 years. At that point, then we should be getting the aid we need from the state to support the student population that we have. The other thing I want to emphasize and double down on is level funding. So the budget I believe we are considering today is a 3.8% increase, as previously mentioned. Level funding is over 7%. Over 7% would be level funding in staff and services. No additional staffing, no additional services, no proactive capital planning, no, investing in buses or transportation so we can reduce the costs over time, things of that nature. Working on reallocating our SPED program so we can do more things in-house. It is still an extremely reactive budget that is being cut not once to 5.5%, but an additional decrease to 3.8%. That is 2 levels of cut from level funding. So I want to make sure that everybody understands our role and this budget. The role of the school committee is to ensure equitable access to education, preferably quality education, for all of our students in Stoughton. That is our job. And it's our role to make sure that we have the budget to support that. And I'm not sure that we can with the budget we have. We are doing the best we can with what we have, but it represents 2 different levels of cuts, getting to the point where we are cutting staff 2 years in a row, and not just 1 or 2. And that is a huge decimation. To decimate our budget repeatedly, year after year, is going to impact the quality of our education, no matter how heroic our staff and teachers are trying to make up the difference themselves. It just, the math doesn't add up. And I'm sorry, I feel very strongly about this, obviously. But our lens when we look at the budget is to answer, can we carry out our responsibility with the budget presented? And the problem is we have too many Band-Aids, future guessing, to try and make up the difference to get the budget to a place where we think we can actually provide a budget that will support the education that our students need. So I just want to reiterate, the school budget cannot continue to sustain these cuts year after year. If you think about the cuts that we endured last year, that was a temporary Band-Aid. I believe that the health insurance lent to the town was another temporary cut that was never restored. So these are continued cuts that are never restored. So it's going to get to the point where we are kicking that can down the road, so that if we need to level fund, if we're in a position to finally level fund, we will not be able to do that because it will be too much money. That is untenable. And it makes me wonder personally, these are the views of Chris Shannon and not the views of Dr. Baeta or the school committee, can Stoughton even really support its own schools? And if we can't, do we need to start getting creative about looking into alternative solutions like regional schools? It is untenable. So there are a few things that we can do. So what can we do about this? One, adjust the town charter so that our budget is due after preferably January 31st, so that we're working with actual numbers rather than a crystal ball. Because that's not fair to the town budget, FinCom, us, the schools, town meeting reps, none of it. And it creates a tension every year. So if we could change that town charter, at least we have a better idea of what we're actually working with and where there may be a deficit or an overage. We just don't know. The second thing is we need to find ways to balance the town budget with a level-funded school budget, not just level-funded town budget. The school budget is part of the town budget. When they say that we're moving forward without cutting town services, that is not true, because we are cutting staff and services for the schools. We are part of the town. So that was my soapbox. No disguised questions there, other than Dr. Beda. Dr. Beda, the question I have for you, because as I grapple with this albatross around our necks that just gets heavier every year, in your experience with other school districts and in your conversations with other superintendents, is this the norm? Or is our story the same story everywhere?
So most of my colleagues don't have a December 31st deadline, so they're still working it, if you will. They're trying to figure it out. I would typically, in my last 2 districts, have conversations with the town manager, within the school committee. There'd be some type of a number. I'd say our number is this, and we just wait for the factual pieces of information. That's what we would do. The line item budget was ready, literally, but then we had it all set up. It was just clicking the numbers. School committee has it. Oh, by the way, there's an extra $250,000. What's the priority? No, we're $250 short. What's the priority? I've had budgets $1 million short. I've had $1 million. I do think that there's an elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is we had a plan, according to what I've been told as a new superintendent, on free cash. It was $300,000 every year. That's what I read. That's what I listened to. And most folks seem to say that's a pretty good plan. It's going to take some time to get there. We fast-tracked that plan to 0 in 1 fiscal year. I think that is going to come back and haunt this town in the future in a lot of ways, because of not the idea of getting there. I think the idea of getting there is actually the right idea, because it allows for you to invest in capital when you do have free cash. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And that's something we've done well as a community. But to that end, it's gone too fast. It's just taking, quote, money that was not expended the prior year, which actually means that, and it happens more on the town side than on our side, but if we didn't have certain mandates, we would probably be able to turn back $500,000 to $750,000 a year. But we all know where that goes. And the days of having $350,000, $450,000, $500,000 in April, what are we going to spend it on, are over, which has been part of the problem in public education for a long time. I'm not a big fan of big purchases in May and June. I stay away from it. And if I do it, it's with school committee support that, hey, we're going to pick up the 100 Chromebooks in this year's budget because it actually saves us money long term. That's an example, not a factual for this. The other thing I think is important is we had to do a correction of contracts over 3 years. I believe my colleague Tom Coulter calls it basically a one-time adjustment, because you can't find people to come work in that contract. It's no different it's not any different with police and fire than it is within the education field right now in certain areas, although they are totally two different jobs and their contracts are different and all that. It's one of the reasons why we now have the Quincy bill back for our public safety officials with the education, because, you know, we had it, we eliminated, now it's back. And it has a cost, and I fully support it because I know that my colleague who hires people, police chief, fire chief, will have a better opportunity to get people from other communities to come work in Stoughton, because like us, there's nobody in the pipeline. It's a win-win. So most of my long-winded, most of my colleagues are not even close to having publicized meetings about their budget. And if they are, they're having priority meetings around the priorities. The enrollment says this, the priority says that. It's just much easier to budget. It allows for all of your November and December to be discussions and prioritizing, and then you get the real number, and you say, well, the triennial plan said we're going to hire 2.5 positions in ELL and special education because we're doing such and such. I'm going to publish triennial plan priorities, and I can't meet a single one of them. It's not much of a plan if you can't meet it. And I think the other elephant in the room is inflation. The governor's budget last year for public education, although it went up significantly, based on the inflation rate, which is, I believe, 1.99, if I remember correctly, it was under 2. Was a big deal because it didn't even come close to meeting the actual inflation. And actually, you'll see that in that report. It just lines it up perfectly. That, you know, if we had the inflation rate at 4.3%, and by the way, it's capped at 4.5%, if I remember correctly. I mean, that's just 2%. That's a deal breaker. Remember that Stoughton, in the first passing of the SO year 3, it was $1,339. I will never forget that number because I was getting $30 in Norton. And I said, wow, I can work with this. And then everything else kind of, the perfect storm happened. You know, the politics of education happened, the priorities and all of that stuff. So we are in a perfect storm. There's a lot of concern out there, and I'll defer to Heidi. But I can tell you that between DESE, business managers, and superintendents, there's a lot of concern. There was a Hockomock League district who last year and they actually went for an override and didn't pass, and they were pretty devastated. I don't know where they are this year because I haven't heard anything yet, but it's December 30th, so I think in the next couple of weeks, and then when House 1 comes up. So that's all the negative. You know, the only thing that I would remind the committee of is it's December 30th. We don't like this. We don't like it at all. I can't wait to listen to your comments later on, Chris, online, because I think I wrote as many of them as I could, but you said a lot of the things that my brain is thinking about, but you said it better. When you said it's 2-level service cuts, it's not just, you know, we're 1%. No, you're absolutely right. It's getting into some weeds here that we don't really want to sustain long term. But I would ask the committee to continue to believe that we will get there. We're going to get there. I prefer to be positive. And how we get there is going to lead a lot of support and discussion from the 5 of you, my office, the support team, on facts and information, because I don't believe this town wants to cut its public school system. It's always been something that we think highly of ourselves with all of the issues that we deal with. At the end of the day, the students that graduate from our public school do really, really well. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And I would like to go on the record and just add that I am extremely grateful for Dr. Baeta and Heidi and the staff for working very long hours over the holiday to ensure that we have the budget, the priorities set, and the information that we need and the community needs to really understand this budget and to move forward. So thank you all for giving up so much of your time so much of your time away from loved ones over the holidays to get this to us. So you are seen. Thank you. And Dr. Beda, I am doing my best to Ted Lasso my way out of this right now, but I'm just having a hard time.
I love it.
I want to echo, I was going to add that at the end, but I wanted to echo my thanks as well. We sent a lot of very detailed questions and received very detailed answers that really, I think, clarified, certainly for me, that a lot of what we're seeing had to do with maybe reclassifying, but also understanding what we were looking at on these different line items. So I really appreciate all the effort, and I appreciate the budget working group as well for your time working on this and bringing more information to us so that we could understand that. Karen, do you have any questions or comments? Does anybody have any questions on the budget itself, the line? I know this is still in discussion in terms of the line items, but have a lot of very detailed questions here, but yes.
Sorry, I have one more question?
Sure, yes.
It is related to the budget in a way. Dr. Bayada, can you take a little bit of time and for our audience, I think we've been through this many times, and explain how we can have an increase in the budget and it's still a decrease in level services? Sometimes when we talk about, or we hear people talk about an increase of 3.8%, a lot of people clap their hands and say, yeah, they got an increase. But can you help us or help the audience understand what that really means as far as level services?
So level services simply means the cost to keep what you have. You don't add anything. Sometimes what you do is you might have some special education offsets like we've seen, but in general, you are saying, I have 200 people who work for me, this is their salaries, I want to keep the 200 people working for me because of whatever, and so on and so forth. Or transportation goes up X percent and you keep the same amount of buses because level services means 15 buses, and even though if it costs $100,000 more, the level service means you're going to get that money. Level funded is a whole different animal. Level funded is you take the current number that you have, and that's what you're getting next year. So that's when you go deep into cuts. So if you're at 7.59% level services, keep what you have, nothing new. Then you go to 5.5, then you go to 3.8. You are still getting an increase from the prior fiscal year, but that increase does not meet the level services to keep what you had. So I've addressed this question probably 400 times in my career, and it's always the easiest way for me to explain it is, if you want to keep what you have and nothing more, nothing else, this is what your number is. It's that simple. But yes, we are getting an increase in our budget. I'll defer.
If I could add one piece to that. Level services is doing the exact same things essentially for kids that we did this year. The difference here, though, a little bit is that we have increasing population. So level services doesn't always mean we have X amount of teachers and we're going to keep X amount of teachers. It can mean, and you're adding 2 more. It's not trying to put constraints on what you buy in supplies or how many staff you have. It's saying if we do X, Y, Z, for all the kids, and there's several more classrooms like we had this year, we had to add teachers that were not budgeted. That's level services, regardless of what it costs you. Level services is doing the same thing, regardless of the cost. Level funded is the dollars don't change. You have 100,000, you have 100,000. And not only are you going to reduce services, but if you have, like we have, increasing student population at the same time, you have a double whammy because you're constrained by the dollars and you are trying to service more people, more kids. So it's a double hit, and that's essentially what Stoughton is experiencing. So a lot of districts do not have increasing enrollment. That's not that common in Massachusetts right now, and hasn't been recently. And then my only other point would be, excuse me, I have a frog. Over the last number of years, all the schools in the country had ESSER funds, COVID funds. There were certain things that you could do with those funds. But a couple of points for the public who may be watching or may listen later. Our other grants, it's supplement, not supplant. unlike the COVID grants, where we could do certain things, that we had some freedom within those grants to do things that we saw that might need to be done, right? And I wasn't here for most of that during Stoughton's time, getting the grants, but essentially all the schools are the same way. Our other grants, I just want to point out so that everybody's, very clear on that, you cannot pay for something that was ever in your budget with a federal grant or most state grants. It has to be additional services, additional supplies, whatever it may be, that you're adding on top of for usually very targeted, like Title I or some of those other grants, the special education grants, to give additional supports, additional equipment or supplies, whatever it is. So even if we get, say if we do have increases on our grants, it does not help our operating budget. So I just want people to understand that as well, because sometimes it can appear that the schools get these big grants, et cetera. Well, it's a formula, they're federal grants, and that's the way they have to be used. So there is no, if they look at all the funds, here's your operating and here's your grants, et cetera. It really just has to be the operating looked at by itself as far as running the district. So I just wanted to point that out. And lastly, I'm sorry, Joe, the perfect storm here is, and Superintendent Baeta mentioned the town's plan to reduce or eliminate using free cash. And again, I support that as well as a finance person. I get that. The perfect storm in that is, as the town of Stoughton is doing that right now, in the time of kind of record inflation, and particularly, as we know, upward pressure on labor inflation. Labor costs for the last couple of years everywhere have just skyrocketed. So while you have upward pressure that is unusually high on labor cost increases, at the same time you have increasing enrollment, at the same time that you have high inflation, and the outlook financially is probably not great, over the next couple of years, and who knows what the state budget will be next year. Don't know how well they'll be doing and how tight they'll be and how generous they might be. So if there was a time to do that, and I'm not saying anything about what the town's decision is, I totally get it from the financial side of things, but it probably came at the worst possible time with all of the other pressures going on across the world, across the country, with record inflation, high labor cost, high pressures on that too, and other funding sources like ESSER and COVID funding expiring on September 30th. So all of those things are coming together. And we also have increasing enrollment, which most districts don't have. So just adding that together. So just wanted to put the context of all the things out there that are happening.
So just to add, every single year that I've been superintendent, the number of districts at what's called hold harmless, meaning $30 minimum. Some years it's been 60, a couple of years it was 90, last year it was 104. Ranges between 121 school districts and 132, and it's all connected to what? Decreased enrollment. So just think about that. We're one of those districts that is now, as we know, on that urban number size in terms of our population change and so on and so forth. So just keep that in mind. That's my last statement. Thank you.
I also want to add that some of the increases that we're seeing are beyond 3.8%. Their expected transportation is minimum, probably a 15% increase in that contract, and 3.8%. It's not going to fit the 3 points. So there are individual pressures that go beyond 3.8%, even if we keep supplies at a 2% inflation rate. So once the math balances out, it does put a lot of pressure trying to increase that. So it's a hard to see. Yeah, it's pretty easy to see that how we can have to cut services even though we are having an overall increase in budget, just because of the increased cost of everything. But that transportation is just killing us. And special education, out of district costs, we don't have any control over those. Those are probably anticipated to increase. Is that anticipated beyond 3.8% as well this year? What's the out of district increase this year? What's the expectation?
It's going to probably be around 5. But the biggest one that we have right now is we're still waiting on a lot of our private schools. That's a concern because we are seeing some things in that area that are always concerning, i.e. they're extending their buildings or any of that stuff, and we could see a tuition charge go up $20,000. as an example. Excuse me. I only wanted to mention one last thing. I would love it if the working group could meet Monday, 6:30 to 7:30 online, just to kind of recap a couple of different things, begin the prioritization, and then be prepared to come to the next school committee meeting with some of those thoughts, if that's okay. 6:30 to 7:30. No, we don't have to post that. Hybrid model. I'll send you a Google Doc invitation. Okay.
Any other questions specifically about the cover page? I want to give everybody a chance. We've had a revised cover page here. I think the two questions we had, or the one was administration. We realized, got the explanation that's for the negotiations we're in and the fixed charges. We have the explanation for that. Any other questions about the cover page? Because this is what we do intend to send forward to the select board at this time. And any other questions about the line item budget? Chris?
Madam Chair, I'm wondering if in the past, the school committee has ever submitted a letter in addition to the superintendent's letter with the budget? In the same way that I know that the town has done and submitted to us regarding the budget, I think it might be helpful for us to reiterate or double down on some of these points.
In response, the answer to that is yes. I've seen that numerous times. I've seen it co-authored with the superintendent and the entire school committee signing it. Yeah. I've seen it just by the school committee chair on behalf of the school department. Co-authored would be myself and the chair, of course, with your input. I mean, that's really, once we get that, the summary page, typically my summary page is a lot of why this, why that, and so on and so forth. If you make your cover pages or summaries too long, people don't read them.
Right.
Or they only read that and they don't do anything else in the budget, which is sometimes what I see. You could have a superintendent executive summary and a school committee summary as well, as long as the language and the lingo that we're using is aligned.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, I would like to make a recommendation that the school committee have its own summary.
Okay.
That really just highlights in bullets what this budget represents, as discussed in this meeting today.
Okay.
I'll add that to my list so that it's
Yeah.
part of the packet.
And Dr. Bayet and Heidi, if you can review that and just make sure it's accurate.
Right. Yes, always helpful.
We do not want to misspeak, of course, but I think just a bullet list of what this represents. I just think it's not that we're setting a dangerous precedent. That precedent has already been set, and we're just meeting it repeatedly. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, feedback? All right. Are you ready to make a motion to approve this budget?
Yeah,
now that we've all had our thoughts.
I will again say this is the increase based on the information we have and the projections we have. And as we get new information, we will make updates. We can advocate. So it sounds like there might be some options for state funding. We also don't know Chapter 70 totals yet. So all that said, we are missing some information. And based on the information we have right now, I will move that we approve the school committee or the proposed budget for FY26 of $65,257,429. Is that's the right number, right? Heidi. I think it's right. I just want to make sure. It's
65, 257,
yes.
429.
Yep.
Yes. All right.
That'd be 3.8.
Yes,
That would be the 3.8%
All right.
increase.
So that motion was made by Lindsay. Do I have a second? Don't everyone jump at once.
Can I qualify with an extremely heavy heart? I second it.
Yes. I just need a second. All right, so it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes. Aye,
Aye.
All right. This has been carried 5-0. And I do want to note that every year we have to adjust based on enrollment and student needs and available funds. So again, because our deadline is before House 1, which is when we find out the funding as per Mass General Law, Chapter 70 on school funds and state aid for public schools, courtesy of the Student Opportunity Act, and before we know our foundation budget. So this is not an unusual process, but this is the best we can do at this time, but we are continuing to work hard to do the best. Again, thank you to everyone who's worked on this so much. This has been a lot of work. I really appreciate all of that effort. Our next regular school committee meeting is Tuesday, January 14th. It's here at the district offices at 31 Pierce Street. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, that was made by Chris, a little more enthusiastically. A second.
Second.
Seconded by Armando. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, 5-0. This meeting is adjourned at 7:42 p.m. Thank you all for coming. Have a safe and happy New Year, and good night.
Online.
Yes, thank you online.
Happy New Year, Maureen.
Yes.